Welcome to Reminding Vermont. I'm your host, Rob Williams, in conversation with Al Vecchione. You can find out more at re-mindingvt.com. Our topic today, and this is an article that you wrote, Al, Bright Light Therapy and Seasonal Affective Disorder, or fantastic acronym, SAD. So, the ancient Greek philosopher Hippocrates said, whoever wishes to investigate medicine should proceed in the first place thus. Consider the seasons of the year. And that's an observation taken from your article about SAD. Al, welcome.
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited about this.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in. We begin with the bear? Or should
sure.
we? Yeah.
So let's begin with the problem. Okay, the problem is in Vermont and very many other places, as the sun retreats, our mood and our behavior deteriorates. We become less interested in things that we were formerly interested in. We become more irritable. Our sleep gets longer and more fatigued, including brain fatigue. We're much less able to think clearly. And for many people who suffer from seasonal affective disorder, there's also a component of carbohydrate craving and weight gain. So we typically think of those things as cabin fever or winter blues. You know, what I want to do is take a sort of a logical, before we look at the research or any of that, there's a logical and in fact an ethological approach to thinking about this. So ethology is the study of animal behavior, and we often forget that we are mammals, and that the things that have changed have been substantial in the last 100 or so years. The invention of the light bulb and things like that.
Electricity, yeah.
But let's go to the bear.
There he is.
The bear hypothesis, because to me this makes perfect sense in terms of what happens to us.
And I should say, you and I are having this conversation in late August.
Yes.
Anticipating the fall and the winter that are ahead.
Exactly, except that if you do bright light therapy, you should begin by August 15th. Because right now we have at least a 20% decrease in the amount of light. And even though it was 80 degrees yesterday, when you looked around, the leaves are changing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? So the effect of the light is already there. You know, I'm an early riser. I usually get up around 5.
Same.
And it's bright all summer.
Yeah.
And now it's pitch dark.
It's pretty dark.
Yeah.
All right, so let's begin with our friend the bear. Ursus.
So seasonal changes in animal behavior are mediated by changes in daily photoperiod, or the amount of sunlight. And a bear spends, in Vermont anyway, spends probably most of December through March hibernating. Now, so how is it that the bear knows to hibernate, and what does it do to prepare for hibernation? Well, bears don't say, you know, fall's coming, let me get my checklist out, eat lots of berries, and, you know, find a cave. And so it's not a cognitive process, hibernation. It's a physiological process. And so a bear has to be alone in a cave, and its physiology, its arousal goes way down. It stays by itself. And so how does it accomplish those things? And sleeps most of the time. Well, you get hypersomnia, right? Which means you sleep, but you don't rest. So you sleep a lot longer.
Hypersomnia.
Hypersomnia. You get weight gain, and you get cravings for carbohydrates. And we as humans get the very same things. Your irritability increases because you're going to be alone and you want to be away from other bears. So all of these natural physiological things happen that enable a bear to hibernate. Well, you know, Thomas Edison's contribution to us is about 140 years old. And in Vermont, it's a lot less than that. The light bulb has not been around for a long time.
No.
TV has not been around for a long time.
Here in the Mad River Valley, we just got electricity after World War II, or some parts of some neighborhoods, so it's not been that long.
So 1943, I think, was the date they give when Vermont, rural Vermont,
electrified,
got electrified. So prior to that, we followed the seasons. We didn't stay up late playing video games and watching TV. There was no light other than candles. And if you think about the natural cycle of farmers, well, in the summer, they were perhaps hyperactive, but certainly very active, getting ready for the fall and winter. When the fall and winter came on, They had much less activity. They didn't really have that much to do. They probably spent a lot of time sitting by the wood fire, feeding the fire, feed the cows a couple times a day, the 2 or 3 cows they had, and snoozing, and really recovering from that summer activity and preparing for the next season. So when we think about ourselves as mammals, this has been going on for 10,000 years. The light bulb's been going on for 140. We're still mammals. Right? So it makes sense that our whole system shuts down for the winter and reignites in the spring, except that the world doesn't work that way anymore. So they don't say, you know, if in midwinter I can't just go to work at 10 a.m. and say, you know, it's wintertime, I really am much more tired and I'll have to leave by 2 because, you know, it's winter. So socially we've made the adjustment. Physiologically, many of us have a difficult time making that adjustment.
Yeah, electricity and the conveniences of the modern age have flattened our seasonal kind of experience that is, as you say, sort of neuroevolutionarily programmed into us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like the bear.
So think of the bear and the whole seasonal affective disorder makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really helpful.
So what are some of the symptoms? Well, depression, loss of interest, low energy, problems with sleep, brain fog, these kinds of things. And also this oversleeping and appetite change and weight gain. That seems to be very specific to the bear preparing to be alone and needing the energy to feed itself while it's not moving
having to carry
much.
itself through the winter.
And of course, this hypersomnia means that you're sleeping a lot longer, but you're not getting any rest. So there's the fatigue component. And I think lots of people complain about that, and you know, we call it the winter blues. We'll look at the data on the amount of people in a minute or two, but it's latitude dependent. So the further north you go, the more challenging the problem is. What's the solution? Bright light therapy. Bright light therapy became the treatment of choice way back in the 90s, maybe even late 80s. The original work was done in the late 70s, early 80s, and now there are meta-analyses of all these studies, and they say that light therapy is as good or better than traditional medication, without all of the side effects and without all of the costs associated with medication.
So you're saying instead of taking a pill, Al, I could actually just use light to help me feel a little better?
Not only will you feel a lot better from the light, but it actually is quicker than medication and has no side effects. So if you go to the antidepressants, particularly the SSRIs that are so popular these days, there's pages full of side effects. Light therapy, there really isn't very much of a side effect. We had a guy years ago who was a kid with autism who, once he started light therapy, his aggression went away. And then in the middle of late fall, his provider called me and said, you know, we're having aggression again. And I said, well, what about the lights? Did we get him started? He said, yep. And then I passed his house that night, and the kid's room was lit up like a church. And so he had turned the lights on and left them on. And so the person became hypomanic.
Got it.
And so that's a little bit of a problem, but you can adjust the lights. You do less lights. And, you know, a half hour, I haven't ever seen anybody go manic on a half an hour of light. And that's really the biggest risk. Like major depression, seasonal affective disorder is really underdiagnosed. And there are multiple reasons for that, including the fact that physicians really may not have much education about it, may not know anything about light therapy, they may. And also, it's not paid for by insurance. So I once went with a person to a medical appointment, and it was clear the person had seasonal affective disorder. I asked the psychiatrist if he could give us a light, and light cost about $200, give or take a few. And he said no, that wasn't covered by insurance, but what he could do is give him a prescription for Abilify. And Abilify is an antipsychotic, so why you would prescribe that for winter depression is questionable. But anyway, when we left, I went and checked the price of the Abilify, and it's about $8,000 a year. So what's up with that? Why will insurance not pay the $200 that research says is just as effective or more effective with less side effects, but it will pay for an antipsychotic, which is an off-label use of that drug. It doesn't sort of make any sense.
Right.
So
Interesting.
I think people just don't know about it, and that's the point of this.
Right.
It's pretty clear, right?
From 2005.
Yeah, so
15 years ago now.
you can go back even, it's early 90s that the American Psychiatric Association is saying light therapy is the best treatment. And if we have a few minutes at the end, I'll just show you a couple of research studies that are around that point out just how well light therapy works. So I'm going to let you read that because
I'll read the second one.
All right.
From Hippocrates, because we read the first one. All diseases occur at all seasons, but certain are more apt to occur and be exacerbated at certain seasons. So the Greeks were onto this.
Yeah, this is 2,400 years old. Yeah. Right, so 2,400 years later, we handed out Prozac instead of giving people the kind of therapy that, again, has no side effects and is really quite effective. So what happens, what are the changes in winter light? Well, like we were just talking about, in the summertime, you get about 14-hour days. In the winter, it's close at 8 hours. You lose almost half the day length. In addition to that, we spend a lot more time outside in the summer. And bright summer light is about 100,000 lumens. A cloudy day, we're going to get 10,000 lumens. So about 1/10 of that, but that's still quite bright, and we're out in it quite a bit. Very bright interior light, perhaps what we have in the studio, is about 2,000 lumens. And average interior light is about 200. So we've gone from 100,000, a good portion of a day, to 200, about 2% of what we get in the summertime. So it would make sense that our bodies would react to that.
Wow.
And again, you know, we have lots of people in Vermont who are out skiing and doing all kinds of things in the winter as well, but we just don't have as much sun, right? So Burlington, Vermont, which is on the lake and much different climate than we have here, they have about 216 days a year where you don't get enough sun to make vitamin D.
Yeah.
Right? And I always think of Burlington as Florida compared to central Vermont.
Oh, it's the lake effect.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you talk a bit about Burlington in the article, That was interesting.
So light makes our world luminous, dazzles our senses, and quietly controls the chemical tides in our bodies. Our mood follows the amount of available sunshine. And in fact, gets lower in the fall and increases in the spring. If we haven't been able to manage the winter depression, if we get too low, we often get a rebound effect in the spring, and in March we go into hypomania. And particularly people with bipolar disorder, that can be a huge problem.
Wow.
And so March Madness is not about basketball, not in our work.
There's an older neuroevolutionary
Exactly.
explanation for March Madness. That's fascinating.
And the chemical tides, there's more than just our mood changing.
Yeah.
So we see as the light decreases, we also have an annual decrease in serotonin, that sort of feel-good neurotransmitter. Right. Body temperature drops, and the need for thyroid hormone increases. Thyroid hormone is sort of it's our furnace. It sets our furnace. So you need more thyroid hormone because you need more heat because the temperature's dropping, but it's also the first line of defense in terms of serotonin dropping. And there's actually some studies where they supplemented people with winter depression. These are people in Antarctica, but they supplement them with thyroid hormone. And in this particular shot here, what you see is the capacity, the cognitive ability declines through the fall. And the group that's supplemented with thyroid hormone regains their cognitive ability, whereas the other ones, the people who don't get the thyroid hormone, continue to decline. The point really is that this is a complicated thing that happens inside your body, and lights don't just wake you up and put you to sleep. They really regulate your whole circadian pattern. So things like hormones, melatonin, sleep, arousal, and temperature regulation are all pieces of this. problem. And how many people get it? What's the prevalence? Well, 3 to 10%, something like that. Bad news for the ladies is that it's probably 3 or 4 to 1 women to men, and which is about, so major depression is about 2 to 1, and
Women to men.
Women to men, and seasonal depression is about 3 or 4 to 1. So it's much more significant for women. One of the things that happens with the onset of seasonal affective disorder is that it happens earlier than depression. In other words, kids get it. Kids get it. And so I think it remains way underdiagnosed among young people and causes lots and lots of problems. And so I had a kid I worked with years ago who had autism, and I went to talk with his mom and dad and meet him, and I was at his house. And what came up is he's having it was the fall. His behavior had deteriorated to some extent, and he was getting aggressive and not sleeping. And so I suggested we use a light, and the mother and dad agreed. They thought it was a good idea. And I ended up bringing the light to school for him. And when I got to school, and we can talk more about like where and when to use the light, but I brought the light to school for him. And when I got there, the secretary said, you know, you need to get down the hall. There's a crisis going on. And I said, well, I'm just here to sort of drop off the light. And she said, no, get down the hall. And I went down the hall, and there were 2 people restraining him.
Wow.
And what happened, so I went in the room and asked the 2 guys to leave, and he ended up just sort of laying on me and quieting himself, you know. And when I asked about what had happened, they said he has a picture schedule where he puts what's next, you know. I'm going to do math, and then I'm going to do lunch, and then I'm going to do whatever's next. And he was so confused he couldn't do that. They kept pushing him to do that. He exploded and ended up in a major restraint. So we started him on the lights, and light therapy really is pretty quick. You should get most of the benefit in a week, and all of the benefit within 2 weeks. So we put him on the lights, and I came to see him a few times, but about 2 weeks later, I came to see him, and he had the whole week laid out, the whole day and the whole week. And he was able to write in those boxes that things were happening. The 2 weeks before that, he couldn't even put the next thing. So his cognitive ability improved substantially. Once you start it, you should do it all winter. And it's latitude dependent. So you're down south, you're in Florida, it's, you know, small percentage of people will get it. As you get up to Vermont, we're talking 21, 22% of people. So about a fifth have clinical problems based on this reaction. And then you go to Alaska and you're talking 35 or 40%. So the further north, the less light, the bigger the problem. This is Delaware, which is a lot further south than us. And of the people surveyed, 92% reported seasonal changes in how they felt, their mood and their behavior. About 27% reported difficulties. There's all kinds of different symptoms that people can experience. Probably 10 years ago now, I was down in St. Louis, and I did a presentation at the Developmental Disabilities Nurses Association, and I did a talk on this. And after the talk, this woman came up to me, and she was crying. She's a nurse. She's crying about her son, and she tells me that her son moved from Southern California to Alaska. And when he moved to Alaska, okay, so now we're going from lots of light to none. And he had, you know, probably 4% of people have some genital problem or some effect from the light change. He got an erection and wouldn't quit. And so they sent him to therapy. And, you know, he got sort of like, you love your mother, you hate your father, you hate your mother, you love your father, and didn't really get anywhere. And so they sent him back home. The problem remediated.
To Southern California.
He goes back to Southern
California.
It's gone.
Wow.
And he's in Southern California for a while and decides the next year to go back to Alaska. Same problem happened.
Wow.
And they send it back, and nobody can figure it out.
Yeah.
And they really start thinking psychodynamically about what the problem is. It's a physiological problem.
Yeah, so as a mammalian species, we sapiens are as subject to the whims of the seasons as any other mammal. So interesting.
Exactly.
Wow.
And we're so inclined to think our way through problems and not think of the physiological component that we're giving him psychotherapy, which, you know, this is a physiological problem.
That's so interesting.
So there are other things that have a cyclical nature, bulimia, chronic fatigue, bipolar disorder. Just as Hippocrates points out, there's lots of seasonal variation in all of these things, including behavior problems in people with developmental disabilities. This is some data we looked at back in 2002. And again, what you see is this is the number of restraints at our agency. September, October, November, restraints go through the roof. December, January, February, and early into March, they go back down to not so many. They're all too many, but but then if you look at end of March, beginning of April, they skyrocket
Come
again.
the spring,
And so, you know, one of the things we learned that is if you can manage the winter depression, you don't get the spring mania. And the spring mania is really the most challenging part because people stop sleeping.
Right.
You know.
Wow.
I have a typical spring mania myself, but it manifests as me coming up with a lot of projects I have to do, March and April. And, you know, I'm going to build stone walls, I'm going to build a small garage, I've got to cut some trees. And, you know, my wife always laughs and says, you know, you'll be over that by June.
That's funny.
So this is the relative frequency, and you can see again that the winter's a problem and the summer people are better. This is my sole contribution to the research. And you see those lines, those 3 lines on each graph? That's the solstice.
Okay.
Winter and summer solstice. And you can see that as the light changes, the problems change dramatically. People do much better when the light comes back and much worse when the light goes away. Again, American Psychiatric Association, Norman Rosenthal, who's the guy who did the original research on seasonal affective disorder, the first double-blind placebo-controlled study, and the Society for Light Treatment in 1990. They said, hey, this is the treatment. I want to make just a quick note about thinking about kids and older people. So when we get this change in our biological clock, the change in our circadian rhythm, there are typical responses based on age. Younger people, so if you think of the normal, if there's such a thing, normal sleep cycle as 11 p.m. till 7 a.m. There's your 8 hours. I don't know if there's anybody who sleeps 11 to 7, but if we take that as a model, it's about 8 hours, which is what you should sleep. And it's later in the evening and early in the morning. Younger people often are phase delayed. So their clock moves forward. So instead of going to bed at 11 o'clock, the body's not ready for sleep until 1 o'clock. And then they really should sleep until 9. But again, schools don't say, okay, come in when your circadian clock adjusts, let me know, and you can come in then. You have to be in at a certain time. There are actually lots of schools who have moved the clocks forward. So kids don't need to come in that early because you're waking them up when they should be asleep. And the other problem is often they fill that little gap between 11 and 1 with video games and television and their phone. And people say, well, I mean, the most pejorative view of that is you're staying up to play video games, when in fact you may just be playing video games because you're staying up. And then we have the opposite problem, people like me who want to go to bed earlier and then wake up quite early. So again, these are natural shifts in our circadian patterns that are not really acknowledged socially, and so they can create all kinds of problems. So what is light therapy about? Well, we're going to provide people with about 10,000 lux. Okay, so that's the measure of the amount of light that gets to you. They used to say full spectrum lights, but way back in the 90s they realized the danger of full spectrum, those UV rays, you don't need it. Bright white lights is just as effective. But you got to get to 10,000 lumens because the amount of time you need the light will be based on how much light is delivered. So,
dosage matters here, essentially. If I can
Dosage-
use that word, dosage. Yeah.
dosage is right. It regulates time.
Right.
So if you drop down to 2,500, then you got to do 2 hours,
I see.
right? And if you do 5,000, then you got to do an hour.
Right.
No, there are very few people who are going to sit for 2 hours and do light therapy. And in fact, I suggest nobody sit for any amount of time and do light therapy. That you find a time in their routine when you can turn the light on.
Right.
So my routine is get up in the morning, hit the button on my coffee pot, hit the button on my computer, hit the button on my light, email, timesheets, seasonal affective disorder workshop. Whatever. That's what I do, and I do it 12 months a year.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's how my wife does it in the winter. She has a happy light, she calls it.
Yeah. Well, and we've done all kinds of things with this. I had a kid years ago, and the mom was not really too much in favor of it. So we did it at school. And again, you can't say to a kid, this kid was 9.
Yeah, that's
you can't say, like, sit there and do the light.
Right.
So they had a sandbox in the classroom. We put the light in the sandbox. We called it beach time. And the kid got to pick, she also had autism, the kid got to pick another student to go and play in the sandbox with her while they watch it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, I mean, you just got to be creative and don't force people to sit still and do it. Just figure out where in the routine it should be. Some of the lights that deliver 10,000 lumens, and you and I were just talking about this local company, their light delivers 10,000 lumens at this distance. That's just, no one is going to sit with a light right here. Some of these nice lights, you can get about 3 feet, 2 or 3 feet away, and still get your 10,000. For the young people, you ought to give them lights in the morning. In fact, most people do the lights in the morning. Right? Yeah. Elderly people or people who try to get to bed early, and we have plenty of young people who do that too. You want to give them the lights in the evening. And about the morning people, about a half hour on awakening. And then depending upon when people start to get tired. So we have people in some of our programs who may get tired at 6 o'clock and really be insistent about going to bed. We'll give them lights at 5 or 5:30, right? Just push the clock.
A little bit, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Response time is 5 days to 2 weeks. You get most of the effect in about 7 days, and you get the entire effect in about 2 weeks. And there's all kinds of research about starting it and stopping it, and do it the whole winter season.
That's amazing. So it's that it acts that quickly over a week to 2 week period.
Yeah, and again, if you want to compare it to Prozac has got 28 days before it kicks in, really.
And a long laundry list of side effects. Yeah.
And the cost and tons of side effects, most of which none of us would want to experience. All right, so the same thing. Start in the morning for a half hour. If that doesn't work, increase it to an hour. If that doesn't work, try the afternoon. And if that doesn't work, a half hour in the afternoon, go to a full hour. Pretty straightforward. I think you should probably identify those symptoms you want relief from. So this started a very long time ago. I have a almost 40-year-old son who was in middle school, and one winter he had a really tough time, and I didn't know I didn't realize at the time he had seasonal affective disorder, but he had the hypersomnia. He was sleeping some days 20 hours, and so me and my other son made a whole bunch of lights and gave them to a bunch of people, but I hung them over his bed, my younger son, and provided the treatment. And after about a week, it was a Saturday morning, and it was about 9:30 in the morning. He's walking around the house, and he says to me, "You mind telling me what I'm doing up?" So painlessly had readjusted.
You had recalibrated.
Yes.
Wow, that's amazing. Amazing.
So let's look at a few of the studies here, and this is fluoxetine, this Prozac. So bright light therapy.
Okay, so I didn't know that. So fluoxetine is the Prozac. Okay.
Yeah. So more people responded in the bright light therapy group than in the fluoxetine group, not by much. Yeah. But the remission rate in the bright light group was twice as much as the remission rate in the Prozac group.
Wow.
Again, with none of the side effects. Right. And the therapy group improved people, the light therapy group improved quicker than the Prozac group, and the Prozac group did some better work with some of the atypical symptoms.
And this is a study, in case people can't quite see the date, this is from 2012, 20
about
years
20
ago.
years ago.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is old stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
This is, I love the data in this one. Let me just show you that. So this is, again, I don't know why people pick Prozac, but you can see the blue line is the light treatment and how much quicker people respond better to the light treatment. And in the end, it's about the same. But again, without agitation, sleep disturbance, and palpitations caused by Prozac. There is, I'll show you this. Now, so we're talking about seasonal affective disorder. There are some studies on light therapy for depression, right? And here is one. And this is a really interesting study for a number of reasons. First of all, the blue line is the Prozac, and the grayish line is the light therapy. And you can see right from the get-go, light therapy outperforms the Prozac. Now, the orange line on the bottom is the combination group. And so one of the studies I read, which isn't this one, is that light therapy may improve the effects of the antidepressant.
Wow.
So you look at 4 weeks.
Yeah.
That's probably all the light therapy, although you're taking Prozac at the same time.
Right.
But from the 4th to the 8th week, the depression improves even more in the combination group, but probably kindled by the light therapy.
There's some kind of synergistic effect there.
Interesting, right?
Yeah. Very, yeah.
And here is, this is a great little study, one treatment.
Wow.
One treatment of bright light
what
therapy.
What can we observe? Wow.
And very significant results in depression scores from one treatment. And in the article, I told a story about the kid I saw who had one treatment. And at the end of his one treatment, his mom looked at him and he smiled, and she said, I realized when I saw him smile, I hadn't seen him smile in months. And so he had one treatment, then he went to school that day, and the teacher emailed the mother and said, what's going on?
What's going on?
So much better today.
This is the 9-year-old boy, right?
Yeah.
It's a great story. Yeah.
So, and you know, I'll end with this. I'm really excited about some of the stuff we're learning about the brain. And we've been talking about MRV-TV and some of those treatments. Well, one of the things we know about depression is there's an asymmetrical balance of frequencies in your frontal lobes. So less activity here and more activity here. And what we see with light therapy on the right there is there's a great asymmetry in terms of alpha. And with light therapy, it begins to come back together.
That's awesome.
Less asymmetrical, and so less depression. So that's really it.
Wow.
It's exciting, interesting, and you know, easy to do.
And important.
And important.
Yeah, especially for those of us in northern climes like Vermont entering the yet another winter. So, well, Al, thanks for the tour. Really, really great. I want to remind our viewers they can find out more at remindingvt.com, including this really fantastic article, Bright Light Therapy and Seasonal Affective Disorder, that summarizes your work here and the slideshow as well. So
Great.
We'll do this again.
All right. Thank you,
Thanks.
Rob.
You've been listening to Reminding Vermont. Find out more at re-mindingvt.com, and we will see you for the next episode.